back to Broken and Brilliant. I'm Carrie O'Toole with Carrie O'Toole Ministries, and we're in our new studio office.
Pretty.
And I'm joined today by Robbie and John Iobst. Welcome.
Welcome, and you said our last name correctly.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's because I know you.
Yeah, true. Most people, it's Iobst, Iobst, but it's Iobst. It's Iobst.
Iobst.
But it's pronounced Iobst.
Iobst.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to talk about a difficult topic today. We're going to talk about marriages that struggle. We're going to talk about pornography, sex addiction, recovery, all of that kind of stuff. So I would love to just maybe have you guys start out and share your story, however you would like to do that.
Okay. We usually kind of give a little background because when I was 8 years old, I found some magazines in my father's bathroom, and I looked at them, and they were pornography. And, you know, at 8, you can't register.
Mm-mm.
But I think now, looking back, it really put a deep insecurity in me. Because I think that two things went right to my heart. First, I have to look like that woman to be loved.
Yeah.
And second, I have to do what she's doing to be loved. So that's where it all started for me.
So for me, I was 8 years old, not in the same bathroom, in Southern California.
That would be a different topic.
It was a whole different, for another show.
Yeah.
Walking to school, third grade, and being a third grade 8-year-old boy, I was taking the least direct route to school possible, and something colorful caught my eye under a bush next to a surfboard manufacturing plant. And I went over and took a look, and it was some pornography. So it turned out that bush apparently was a pornography timeshare. I never met any of the other timeshare members. Did return repeatedly. And a couple things happened to me. Right away, I knew I liked it. I knew I wasn't supposed to. I felt ashamed about liking it, and made a decision that I was going to keep this part of my life secret.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I can't draw a line and encircle a date and say, here's the day I became a sex addict. But that's certainly the day where it started. With that decision about, I'm going to keep this secret, I'm ashamed so no one can know, was laid the foundation for a very quick slippery slope into a full-blown out-of-control sex addiction.
And so he was married and divorced when I met him, and we met, and 5 months later, we got married. And during the 5 months, he said to me one time, he said, I think I need to tell you something. And I said, what? He said, I'm a sex addict. Now, I was two things, naive and desperate to be loved. I really thought if I got married, then pretty much that means I'm validated for life. And so I only asked him one question our whole dating time, and that's, are you better?
Sure.
He lied. Completely. And so then we started our marriage. And the first 7 years were lies. I figured out finally that something was really wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and he was addicted to this stuff. And we were both leaders in our church, led a Bible study, taught the men's group, and so it became my secret too. Because I didn't want anybody in church to think we were anything but godly. And he had to be a perfect godly man because that validated my worth as a woman, and that's why I got married in the first place. So we would have the same conversation a lot of couples do. I would say, John, we don't do this, we're Christians, and will you stop?
Okay. And then
And that's
would
what
go
it
down
looked
and
like.
the shame
Yeah.
and the
Mhm.
whole thing.
But he did
And I,
again.
of course, would commit to changing. What I was really committing to change was the number of breadcrumbs. I just was going to make sure I didn't get caught again. I wasn't going to actually be any different.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we did this for like 7 years, off and on, and we had our son Noah. And when Noah was 4 years old, one night, and I you know, you never know exactly why, but the Spirit was there, and I just said, enough. I'm not going to live like this. I'm not going to have my son grow up in a house of pornography. So I left.
So I came home to an empty house, Wednesday, December 26th, 2003.
December 26th.
February.
February, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
February 26th.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
I was- Well, that would have been
That would have
Yeah.
been a whole different thing.
right.
So February 26th, 2003, so just short of 14 years ago. And I came home to an empty house and a note, and wasn't entirely sure whether that meant I was divorced now for a second time or what. And we sometime later met at a Denny's, as I recall.
Yeah.
And she gave me a list of things that I needed to get done before she would consider coming back into the home. And they were all basically along the line. Some of them were about setting up boundaries to change my behavior, but most of it was a very clear declaration on her part that she was no longer going to keep the deal that we had. You know, there's this interesting unspoken deal that addicts and their co-addicted spouses have, is that while they may disagree on almost everything, they agree that the addiction needs to be secret. And she was going to break that deal. And it was, go to the pastor, go to this person, make sure that everyone, and that, you know, obviously was going to result in some humiliation and obviously being required to step down from various responsibilities within the church. And so I went along with it because that seemed more palatable than getting divorced, marginally, more palatable. And mostly in my head, I was just like, well, I'm going to go along with this for as long as it takes for her to get over it.
Right. So you had no.
I had no real hope, belief, intention, plan to actually change my behavior any longer than until this wasn't going to be the hot topic of the month.
You know, and I just want to say about sex addiction, a lot of people don't understand that.
Right.
Don't understand how is it an addiction? It's not a chemical that
Right.
you're taking into your body, all of that. How can you explain that just for people who don't
So
understand?
it turns out, based on brain scans, that a otherwise normal human, while exposed to pornography, their brain lights up almost identically to an otherwise normal human taking cocaine. I mean, it's a pretty profound stimulant. It will, you know, pretty significantly alter your brain chemistry. And because of that, because of those brain changes, while it is not an ingestible chemical, it has the same effect on you as ingesting a chemical.
Right.
You know, clearly we live in a culture that is sexually saturated, I guess is the best way that I can put it. There is this assumption that you know, based on the various media forms, not pornography, but just TV, movies, everything else, that the only good sex is illicit sex. It's either before marriage or an affair, and that the only boring sex is if you get married. So there is a lot of confusion. I obviously, like most normal people, what I really wanted in life was to feel loved, to feel accepted. And very early in my life, and that moment at 8 years old was one of those moments, I confused being loved and sex. So I got this interesting message in my head that if the only way you can communicate, anyone can communicate to me that they accept me or love me, is if they take their clothes off. And then we have the pornography industry where in any normal circumstance, any woman not fully clothed realizes that she's being seen by a man, her reaction is pretty predictable. She's going to cover up, she's going to scream, she's going to ask him to leave. Pornography does it completely the opposite, but it doesn't convey the message that she is somehow inappropriate or doesn't have boundaries. It's that she is relieved that it's you. It's no real transaction, nothing's real about it, but there is this sense of, oh, okay, so she's relieved that it's me because she loves and accepts me. And that message gets reinforced over and over again, and and then so the addiction just progresses, and unfortunately then it can progress beyond just looking at images into some
Right.
pretty unsavory behavior.
Well, it's progressive, but there are people, of course, who watch pornography or do whatever every once in a while, and they're not addicts. The word addict means you can't stop, really, and so those are the people that we
Right.
see a lot.
Right. Okay, so I stopped your story.
So we
You had moved out.
entered
Mhm.
we entered the year of anger and counseling.
We've got to get that trademark.
The year of anger and counseling.
yes.
Okay.
It was a horrible year.
Sounds
And-
fun. Yeah.
I was very, very angry, and we were celibate for 9-10 months, and we both went to counseling. It was really, we were in San Diego, and we knew a person, and he had a group of Christian sex addicts who were men, and then he had this.
Which you would have thought is an oxymoron, but
Not
apparently
not.
less than you might imagine.
Right.
And then he had another counselor in his group who was a woman who led a group of women all married to Christian sex addicts. So we did that, and we had a lot of anger and a lot of talks, but slowly but surely, God started to change us. You said it was about 100 days in, you finally...
Yeah, interestingly enough, for me, and again, because it's not a chemical addiction, you wouldn't think in terms of withdrawals. But I had a pretty profound sense of withdrawal from this. For me, the way I experienced it was though every possible noisemaker in the world was turned all the way up, and the speaker was set in my head. It just everything agitated me, and day after day, it seemed worse day by day, even though I wasn't acting out. I was sober, so I was not viewing pornography, I was not masturbating, I was not involved with any other person, and you'd think, okay, well that's going to be better. For me, it was somewhere between 90 and 100 days before I had the first day that was better than the day before.
Wow.
Just because it just took that long for me to have
to like clear your system. Really.
for my brain to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty terrible.
And about the same time, he started doing it for himself. He started changing.
Right. Yeah. Because I had said, I was going to commit to this as long as it took for her to get over it, and thankfully she didn't for a long enough period of time for me to finally decide I'm going to do this for me. There are consequences to addictions. There just always are. But typically we only focus on the external consequences. So because of this addiction you lost a job, or because of this addiction you were arrested, or because of this addiction, so those things are the outside. But there's the internal consequences of the shame and the feeling of separation from God and the worthlessness. And it took a while for me to shift my eyes from the woe is me, my wife won't talk to me, or woe is me, the external stuff, and finally start to realize that because of this, I don't really like myself. I don't like anything about me. Some of the crazy thinking of everyone would be better off without me, including me. And finally starting to realize that maybe I could learn how to live in my own skin, learn how to have a relationship with God. Because of course I had all my, dad issues, confusing God with, how I assumed my father thought of me, and that I was never going to be good enough. And so there was just all of that mess was a lot of what that year was about for me. Because obviously I came into that year ashamed. And then the beginning of the year was basically a series of humiliations, which, are of course so good for shame.
Yeah, it helps. It helps a lot, doesn't it?
So it took some time for that the withdrawal part, but also for me to just kind of get slowed down and start to realize that for me, I guess a really big turning point for me is I had been a pastor. I had been involved with church. I had done all these things. So I had this pretty pretty deep understanding of who God was and theology, but I had this other understanding of God who was somehow disappointed with me. So here he is, I have this completely contradictory view of God is powerful enough that simply by speaking the universe sprang into existence. And in this very, very small part of the universe is me. So I'm a very small, insignificant part of how grand this is, but somehow I had this belief that my shame was too big for God to handle. And there is, part of my recovery had to do with 12-step programs, and there is the second step talks about this notion of coming to an understanding of God who can restore you to sanity. And I just always assumed that was talking about changing my behavior. And it was that moment I realized that my insanity was, the complete insanity was, how could my shame be bigger than the God who created the universe? That was my aha moment. I go, oh.
That's not
So
even logical.
Maybe I'm not thinking about God right. And could kind of unclench a little and let go and maybe let God decide who God was rather than me deciding who God was. And so.
And during that time, as I told you about when I was 8 years old, this deep insecurity. And so my year was filled with two parts. First was he's not all the problem. Because I went in, day one, fix him, and then we'll have a good marriage. And that's not true. I was totally part of the marriage. I picked him. And since I picked him, I needed to work on stuff. And then the other thing is that I started to understand that I am worth something. And I am worth being totally loved and completely accepted by God, by John, and by myself. So that grew in me. And we both just got healthier and healthier. And then almost a year after I left him, we had our vows renewed on the beach in San Diego. It was really cool because we invited the people who didn't pick sides and some of the 12-step people who had helped us.
Right. Yeah, as Robbie mentioned, we had a period of sexual abstinence, mostly because of the violation of trust. And we decided not to just go back to having a sexual relationship in that context, but to have a whole different wedding night.
Let's start
And
again.
just start over.
Because our bed used to be crowded because it was he and I and all the fantasies, not just of him, but of me too. And so after we renewed our vows, we now regard the marriage bed as something very sacred, and it's just John and me and God. It's much better.
Somewhere along the way,
the fewer the better.
The fewer the better.
Yeah.
So much less crowded. Occasionally the dogs come up, and that's
another story.
That's a whole other crowded thing. We somewhere along the way came to an understanding of intimacy as being honest with one another. That we define intimacy as being completely honest with my thoughts, feelings, and actions. And that then requires some level of vulnerability about telling the truth. And the dilemma of addiction and shame is you can't possibly tell the truth, because one of the great messages that shame carries is, well, if you knew the truth about me, you would reject me.
Right.
And the only reason I'm pursuing this addiction is because I can't possibly tolerate being rejected. I have to be loved. So it's this completely self-defeating cycle. And so the solution, a solution of telling the truth about myself, especially to someone who, if they reject me, it's going to really matter, in the light of that message that if you knew the truth, you will reject me, it's an absolute, seems like stepping right off a cliff. But it's the only thing you can possibly do that's ever going to make any difference. It's ever going to make trust possible, intimacy possible, love possible again.
Wow, what a story. So just to wrap this up, this was back in 2003, 2004,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, so you've had another 14 years.
Yeah. We've been married 20 years.
20 years. So you had
So
7 and then it blew up.
Right.
And then,
13 of them happily.
yeah.
Yes.
So 7 lying, 1 angry, 13.
Pretty much.
Have a little timeline there. Good to have those delineations.
Yes.
Sounds like an outline for a book.
Well, John, since you brought that up, I've been thinking that you guys should write a book.
Well, Robbie is an author. She's got a couple of books out already, and it actually did become an outline for a book. The first part of the book we call When We Were Caught in Denial. So that's the first 7 years. And then the next year was I Was Caught in the Act. And then the last 13 years or so is We Were Caught in the Arms of a Loving God. And the book is called
God.
Caught.
Wow, look how that worked out. That's awesome. So we're going to do another podcast right after this. So
Excellent.
those of you who want to know more about the book can join in for that one. We'll post them very closely together. But tell us where we can get your book.
It releases nationwide, so you will find it in bookstores near you on January 10th, 2017. Right now, you can pre-order it on Amazon
In
or
the printed version.
in the printed
Okay.
version, or you can get the ebook right now off Barnes and Noble. You can get the Nook. You can get the Kindle off Amazon.
So
Awesome.
those are already released.
And of course, you can go to our website,
Which is
caughtinhisarms.com.
awesome. And we'll have the link on the podcast too.
Thank
So
you.
at the bottom, under the description, look for the link there. So, well, thank you guys so much for joining me. We will continue this conversation so you all can learn about the book and a little bit more about your ministry and what you guys are doing
Excellent.
as a result. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And we will see you back here next time on Broken and Brilliant.